Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, so you already know that the ITAF guidelines represent the absolute gold standard for our industry.
The baseline of everything we do.
Exactly. But today, we're doing something a little different. We are skipping the executive summary entirely.
Straight past it.
Taking a magnifying glass directly to Appendices A, B, and C.
Specifically, ISACA's Information Technology Audit Framework, Companion Performance Guidelines 2208.
The ones focused on IT audit sampling.
Right.
And for this deep dive, we're kind of stepping into the roles of your personal instructors for an advanced masterclass.
I like that framing.
Yeah, because we're looking at the actual mathematical warfare of auditing here. This is where the theoretical framework translates into boots-on-the-ground reality.
That instructor mindset is really the perfect way to approach this material. Because when professionals look at ITF 2208, they so often focus entirely on the core text.
Right, they just skim it.
Yeah, and they treat the appendices as mere reference material, like a glossary to check if they forget an acronym or something.
Which is wild.
It is a fundamental misreading of the architecture. What's fascinating here is that appendices A, B, and C actually contain the structural DNA of the entire methodology.
The core of it.
They are the immutable rules, the operational maps, and the required mathematical vocabulary.
You can't function without them.
Exactly. Without mastering these three specific sections, an auditor isn't actually auditing a system.
What are they doing then?
They're just randomly querying databases and hoping they stumble across an anomaly.
And hope is not a recognized audit strategy.
Definitely not.
Which is exactly why we're unpacking this specifically for you today. You operate in an environment where, honestly, information overload is just the baseline.
It's Tuesday.
Right. You're dealing with server clusters generating petabytes of log data.
Distributed microservices.
Communicating across multi-cloud environments.
And legacy systems that are, frankly, barely holding together.
Duct tape and wire. So, understanding the rigorous rules and the statistical guidelines of how top-tier experts actually sample that data, it gives you a profound advantage.
It completely upgrades your critical thinking.
It changes how you evaluate risk, how you make decisions when you're just staring at a seemingly infinite ocean of data points.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the guidelines we're about to dissect represent the collective distilled wisdom of a massive global community of IT professionals.
Decades of experience.
But, and this is key, the framework itself explicitly notes that these guidelines cannot guarantee a successful outcome just on their own.
They aren't magic?
No. They require human professional judgment. They require a practitioner to look at a statistical output and actually understand the business context behind it.
So our goal today is to bridge that gap, the gap between the rigid framework and the fluid reality of professional judgment.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this syllabus and look at our roadmap. We're tackling this sequentially. First, we'll decode Appendix A.
The rules of the road.
Right, which outlines the mandatory, non-negotiable standards of professional behavior. Second, we'll transition into Appendix B.
The how-to mapping.
Yes, which serves as the translation matrix between those mandatory rules and your daily performance.
Connecting the dots.
And finally, we'll immerse ourselves in Appendix C, the vocabulary of truth, where we'll define the exact statistical terminology and concepts you need to speak this language natively.
It really is the only logical progression. The framework demands that you internalize the rules before you look at the operational map.
Obviously.
And you must understand the map before you begin utilizing the highly specific vocabulary of statistical sampling.
So let's officially shift into instructor mode. Opening up Section 1, Appendix A, Related Standards.
The rules of the road.
When you look at Appendix A, it just presents as a list of numerical standards. But the operative word you have to scan for in this text is the word shall.
Crucial distinction there.
Yeah, in the legal and professional framework domain, should indicates a best practice.
A strong recommendation.
But shall indicates an absolute, unyielding mandate.
The distinction is critical. If a practitioner fails to execute a shall statement, the entire audit is compromised from a quality assurance perspective.
It's dead in the water.
Pretty much. Let's look at the first mandate on the list, Standard 1006.
Specifically, 1006.1.
Right, which addresses proficiency. The text dictates, and I quote, IT audit and assurance practitioners, collectively with others assisting with the audit and assurance engagement, shall possess the professional competence to perform the work required.
The operative word there isn't competence, though. I mean, that is obviously required.
Sure.
The linchpin of that standard is the word collectively.
Yes.
That single word is a formal acknowledgement by the framework that modern enterprise technology has simply become too vast.
Too deeply specialized.
And just too complex for any one individual to fully comprehend.
It's impossible. A single auditor might hold multiple certifications. They might have 20 years of experience in mainframe security.
Which is great.
But if the scope of the audit suddenly expands to include, say, a newly deployed Kubernetes cluster managing containerized microservices on AWS.
Their legacy experience does not translate to proficiency.
Not at all. Standard 1006.1 legally binds the lead auditor to look at their team and ask, do we actually know what we are looking at?
And if the answer is no,
they are mandated to bring in a subject matter expert.
That perfectly prevents the classic halo effect in auditing.
Oh, yeah.
Where, a brilliant financial auditor assumes they can seamlessly audit an automated trading algorithm just because they understand the financial output.
They understand the dollars, so they think they understand the code.
Right. But if the team lacks a data scientist who understands the algorithmic weights, the collective proficiency is 0.
Exactly 0.
Moving down the syllabus, we encounter Standard 1201, Risk Assessment and Planning, specifically Statement 1201.3.
This is a big one.
It is. This mandate requires that practitioners shall consider subject matter risk, audit risk, and related exposure to the enterprise when planning their engagements.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit because it raises an important question regarding methodology. Why separate risk into those 3 highly specific buckets during the planning phase?
It forces a multidimensional view.
It forces you to look at the whole board. Let's break those down, starting with subject matter risk.
Okay.
This is the inherent vulnerability of the specific technology under review, completely independent of the auditor.
So, like, the system itself.
Right. If you're evaluating a public-facing API gateway that handles customer authentication, the subject matter risk is exceptionally high.
It's a prime target for external threat actors.
Then you have audit risk, which shifts the focus entirely.
Audit risk has nothing to do with the API gateway.
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
It is entirely about the failure of the auditor.
Wow.
It's the mathematical and procedural risk that you, as the professional, execute your sampling plan perfectly, review your data frames, and still issue a clean bill of health on a system that is fundamentally compromised.
You fail to detect the material weakness.
Exactly. And the third prong, related exposure to the enterprise, is what ties the technical finding to the boardroom.
It forces you to look up from the keyboard.
The standard mandates that you zoom out. If that API gateway fails, or if your audit fails to detect a vulnerability in it, what is the blast radius?
Does it just mean a temporary service degradation?
Or does it trigger a catastrophic cascade? Does it expose millions of plaintext passwords, triggering GDPR fines, massive reputational damage, and an immediate drop in shareholder value?
You must calculate that enterprise exposure before you even pull your first data sample.
Because if you miscalculate the enterprise exposure, you misallocate your resources.
You might spend 3 weeks rigorously sampling a low-exposure internal timekeeping system.
And only spend 3 days sampling the high-exposure API gateway.
Which is a disaster.
Yeah.
So Standard 1201 prevents that misalignment. Now, once the planning is complete, we transition to execution.
Governed by Standard 1204, Performance and Supervision.
Appendix A highlights 3 crucial statements here, 1204.4, 1204.5, and 1204.7. Let's view the mandate for 1204.4. It states practitioners shall obtain and preserve sufficient and appropriate evidence.
The inclusion of the word preserve is the most challenging aspect of that standard in a modern IT context.
Because it's not physical anymore.
Right. Finding anomalous evidence in an on-premises physical server is one thing. You can literally unplug it. But preserving evidence in an ephemeral, dynamic cloud environment is an entirely different operational discipline.
I want to focus on that. In legacy environments, evidence was static. But today, you might be auditing an auto-scaling environment.
Very common.
A server instance spins up to handle a massive spike in web traffic.
An error occurs on that specific instance.
And then 10 minutes later, as traffic drops, the system automatically terminates and deletes that server instance.
The evidence vanishes into the ether.
Gone.
And the standard does not offer leniency for ephemeral environments. It dictates that you shall preserve the evidence.
No excuses.
None. This means the audit team must understand the architecture well enough to ensure logging mechanisms are actively pushing data to a centralized write-once-read-many or worm storage vault before the instances terminate.
If an auditor witnesses a security alert flashing on a monitoring dashboard but fails to secure the underlying raw log file that triggered the alert,
They have no evidence. They just have an anecdote.
and Standard 1204 does not allow you to base an audit opinion on anecdotes.
Never.
Which brings up an immediate challenge in the field. What happens when you physically cannot preserve or obtain the evidence?
It happens.
Let's say the enterprise's data retention policy mandates the deletion of certain transaction logs after 30 days to save on storage costs.
But your audit covers a 90-day window.
All right.
The framework anticipates that exact vulnerability in the real world, which brings us to Standard 1204.7. It introduces the mechanism of a scope limitation.
A vital tool.
When a practitioner cannot obtain the required evidence, even after applying alternative or additional test procedures, they are mandated to formally declare a scope limitation in their final opinion.
That requires a significant amount of professional fortitude.
It really does.
Yeah.
You have to formally document in front of the executive board, I was unable to view the transaction logs for the first 60 days of the quarter. Therefore, I can make zero assurances regarding the integrity of the system during that time frame.
It's an admission of an operational blind spot.
Yes, but it acts as an absolute firewall against management, attempting to use an incomplete audit as a blanket shield of compliance.
Oh, that makes sense. If you don't declare the scope limitation, you own the risk of whatever happened in those missing 60 days.
You're on the hook for it.
Yeah.
By declaring it, you force the enterprise to acknowledge their own lack of visibility.
That relentless pursuit of verifiable reality leads us directly into the final standard listed in Appendix A, Standard 1205, evidence.
This is where the framework outlines the psychological requirement of the job.
Statement 1205.1 demands sufficient and appropriate evidence to draw reasonable conclusions. But Statement 1205.2 introduces a concept that redefines how an auditor interacts with the world.
Applying professional skepticism.
Yes. IT audit and assurance practitioners shall evaluate the sufficiency of evidence obtained to support conclusions and achieve engagement objectives.
Professional skepticism is perhaps the most misunderstood term in the entire framework.
People think it means being a jerk.
Exactly. It is frequently confused with innate cynicism or a presumption of guilt.
Let's clearly delineate those two concepts for everyone. A cynic approaches an enterprise environment assuming that the architecture is fundamentally broken,
That the system administrators are actively hiding vulnerabilities.
and that every piece of data is manipulated. That is a toxic, biased approach that ruins professional relationships.
And it often leads to confirmation bias, where you only look for data that proves your negative hypothesis.
Right. Professional skepticism, by contrast, is an objective, structural requirement.
It means you do not accept an assertion without empirical proof, regardless of the authority or the reputation of the person making the assertion.
So, if the Chief Information Security Officer provides a highly polished presentation stating that their new zero-trust architecture has completely eliminated lateral movement within the network,
Professional skepticism dictates your response.
and your response isn't, "I don't believe you."
No. Your response is, that is an impressive architecture. Please provide the raw penetration testing logs, the firewall rule sets, and the Active Directory configuration file so we can independently verify that assertion.
You do not trust, you merely verify.
And the standard goes deeper than just verifying human assertions. It requires you to be skeptical of the evidence itself. 1205.2 mandates that you evaluate the sufficiency of the evidence.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, as management hands you an Excel spreadsheet containing a list of terminated employees and their system access revocation dates, skepticism requires you to ask fundamental questions about the provenance of that file.
Who generated the query?
What parameters were used to pull the data?
Was it pulled directly from the identity management system, or was it manually aggregated from 3 different HR databases?
Could the data have been altered between the time it was exported and the time it was emailed to the audit team?
You have to aggressively interrogate the integrity of the data before you can use it to form a conclusion.
It is a mentally taxing methodology. I mean, human cognitive bias naturally leans toward trusting authoritative figures and accepting cleanly presented data at face value.
We want to believe the nice spreadsheet.
We really do. Standard 1205 exists specifically to short-circuit that cognitive bias. It legally requires you to maintain a state of rigorous, objective doubt.
That concludes the foundation of our masterclass. We've thoroughly mapped Appendix A.
The rules are set.
We understand the mandate for collective proficiency. We know how to dissect risk across the subject matter, the audit process, and the broader enterprise.
We recognize the critical, often difficult mandate to preserve ephemeral digital evidence,
The ethical requirement to declare a scope limitation when we cannot.
and the psychological necessity of professional skepticism.
Perfect. Now, let's transition to Section 2 of our syllabus, Appendix B related guidelines. I refer to this as the how-to mapping.
To utilize Appendix B effectively, we need to decode the numerical taxonomy ISAC employs.
It can be a little dry, but it's important.
Very. In Appendix A, we were operating in the 1000 level series, 1006, 1201, 1204. Those represent the standards. They are the overarching laws.
Right.
In Appendix B, we shift into the 2000 and 2200 level series. These represent the guidelines.
So the guidelines are the operational instructions. They detail the performance expectations and the recommended methodologies for actually satisfying the mandates of the 1000 level standards.
Appendix B functions as a cross-reference matrix, directly linking the daily tactical actions of an auditor to the strategic laws of the framework.
This matrix is essential because a standard without a guideline is merely an abstract demand.
Telling an auditor they shall possess collective proficiency without providing a guideline on how to measure or assemble that proficiency is unhelpful. Yeah, good luck with that.
Conversely, guidelines without standards lack authority. They're just suggestions. Appendix B fuses them together.
Some of these mappings are incredibly straightforward, establishing a direct one-to-one relationship.
Like Guideline 2006.
Right, which provides granular instructions on evaluating team certifications, past experience, and technical training. It maps directly back to Standard 1006, the mandate for proficiency.
And Guideline 2201, which details the mathematical models and control frameworks used to calculate risk, maps directly to Standard 1201, the mandate for risk assessment.
And Guideline 2205, which explores specific data gathering and sampling techniques, maps perfectly to Standard 1205, the mandate for evidence.
Those linear mappings are easy to digest. However, the true architectural brilliance of the framework is revealed when we examine the non-linear mappings.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Let's examine Guideline 2204, which covers performance and supervision. It doesn't just map back to a single standard.
Not at all. It serves as an operational anchor for three distinct foundational standards simultaneously. It maps to Standard 1005, which governs due professional care.
It maps to Standard 1205, governing evidence.
And it maps to Standard 1401, which dictates reporting.
We have to analyze why the architects of this framework designed that specific radial mapping. Why does the daily act of performance and supervision carry the weight of three different standards?
Well, because in the context of an IT audit, performance is not an isolated metric.
It's the central nervous system of the entire engagement.
Let's visualize this with a complex scenario. Imagine an audit team evaluating a multinational bank's swift transaction processing system.
High stakes, highly technical environment.
The highest. The lead auditor is responsible for the supervision of a team of junior data analysts who are running SQL queries against the transaction database.
Okay, so if the lead auditor fails to properly supervise those junior analysts, perhaps they don't review the exact syntax of the SQL queries being used, they're immediately violating Standard 1005. Due professional care.
They are allowing unchecked technical work to occur under their watch.
And the downstream effects of that lack of supervision are immediate.
Let's say a junior analyst uses a flawed join statement in their SQL query.
Happens all the time.
Right. And they inadvertently exclude a massive subset of international transactions from the sample.
Because the performance was flawed, the evidence gathered is now incomplete and fundamentally corrupted.
Which means the team has instantly violated Standard 1205. Evidence. They do not have sufficient and appropriate data.
The cascading failure continues right to the end of the engagement. The team analyzes that corrupted, incomplete dataset.
They find no anomalies in the data they pulled, so they draft a final report declaring the SWIFT transaction system to be functioning perfectly and fully compliant.
Because their performance and evidence gathering are compromised, their final communication is functionally a work of fiction.
A very dangerous work of fiction. And this violates Standard 1401 reporting.
Guideline 2204 is the linchpin. If performance and supervision fail, the entire interconnected web of professional care, evidence integrity, and reporting accuracy collapses.
The matrix in Appendix B visualizes that reality. It proves that in our discipline, you cannot separate the management of the team from the integrity of the data.
That holistic understanding of the operational map transitions us perfectly into the deepest and most technically demanding section of our syllabus.
The big one, Section 3, Appendix C terms and definitions.
This is the vocabulary of truth.
You cannot execute the guidelines in Appendix B or satisfy the standards in Appendix A if you do not possess a granular understanding of the language.
Words matter. If a lead auditor and a data engineer define a statistical concept differently, their collaboration will result in critical errors.
Appendix C provides the definitive, unyielding definitions of the concepts and tools used in IT audit sampling. We're going to deconstruct these terms by organizing them into 5 specific operational groupings.
Grouping 1 covers the core concepts. The 2 foundational terms here are population and audit sampling.
Okay.
The text provides a very specific definition for population: the entire set of data from which a sample is selected and about which an IT auditor wishes to draw conclusions.
Let's contextualize this using a real enterprise environment.
Right, forget the simplistic analogies for a second.
Exactly. Think about a massive AWS S3 bucket. It's serving as the central data lake for a global retail corporation.
Containing billions of individual JSON files.
Every single customer interaction, every login event, every shopping cart addition, and every final purchase transaction over a 3-year period.
That S3 bucket is your population.
It is the absolute totality of the environment you are tasked with evaluating.
The challenge, of course, is that analyzing a population of that magnitude in its entirety is often computationally impossible.
Or, at the very least, prohibitively expensive and time-consuming. You can't just run a full diagnostic query against a multi-petabyte data lake without severely degrading the performance of the production environment.
The engineers would scream.
They absolutely would. This necessitates the second term, audit sampling.
The framework defines audit sampling as the application of audit procedures to less than 100% of the items within a population to obtain evidence about a particular characteristic of the population.
I know you said forget simplistic analogies, but it's like making a massive pot of soup.
The soup analogy.
The soup is the population. Audit sampling is taking 1 spoonful to see if the whole pot needs more salt, rather than drinking the entire pot to find out.
It works. Instead of querying the entire S3 bucket, you extract a highly specific representative data frame. You pull a subset of the JSON files.
And you apply your audit procedures, checking for encryption standards, validating timestamp formatting, verifying access control tags on that subset.
The foundational premise of audit sampling is that if your sample is truly representative, the characteristics you identify in the subset can be mathematically projected across the entire multi-petabyte population.
But the phrase, if your sample is truly representative, is doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting in that premise.
Huge amount.
And that introduces the inherent danger of our profession, bringing us to grouping 2, risks and margins. The 2 critical terms here are sampling risk and tolerable error.
Let's define sampling risk first. The text states it is the possibility that the items selected in a sample are not truly representative of the population being tested.
Going back to the soup, your spoonful just happened to miss the potatoes, so you falsely conclude the soup has no potatoes.
Mathematically, it's the reality that your subset might accidentally skew towards a specific characteristic, leading you to a false conclusion.
Let's apply this to our S3 data lake scenario. Suppose you randomly extract 10,000 JSON transaction files to test for compliance with a new encryption standard.
Okay.
By pure statistical anomaly, the 10,000 files your query grabbed all happen to originate from the corporation's European servers, which were updated to the new encryption standard months ago.
So your sample shows 100% compliance.
Exactly. And based on that sample, you conclude the entire global population is compliant.
However, you completely missed the millions of transactions originating from the legacy Asian servers, which are still using outdated, vulnerable encryption.
The population is fundamentally flawed, but your sample missed the vulnerability. That is sampling risk.
It is the ever-present danger of drawing an inaccurate conclusion simply because of the specific data packets you happen to select.
And because sampling risk can never be reduced to absolute 0 unless you test 100% of the population, professionals must establish mathematical boundaries.
We must define tolerable error.
The text defines this as the maximum error in the population that professionals are willing to accept and still conclude that the test objective has been achieved.
This concept is highly nuanced, and the framework makes a vital distinction based on the specific type of testing being performed.
Tolerable error is calculated completely differently depending on whether you are executing a substantive test or a compliance test.
Let's dissect that distinction. The text states that for substantive tests, tolerable error is intrinsically tied to a professional's judgment regarding materiality.
Materiality. What does that look like when we're dealing with mass enterprise data sets?
Well, substantive testing generally focuses on quantitative accuracy numbers, financial values, and data integrity. Imagine you're auditing the revenue recognition system of a Fortune 500 company.
Okay, the database processes millions of microtransactions a day.
Right. You pull a sample and begin finding minor discrepancies. A transaction is recorded as $10 or 5 cents instead of $10.
In a vacuum, an error is an error.
But materiality asks, does this error actually matter to the macro-level health of the enterprise or to the decisions of its shareholders?
Right. If a company generating $40 billion in annual revenue has a projected database error totaling $12,000, that error is immaterial.
It does not alter the fundamental financial reality of the enterprise. Therefore, for a substantive test, the auditor establishes a monetary threshold.
They might determine, based on the sheer scale of this enterprise, we are establishing a tolerable error threshold of $5 million.
If our sample projects that the total errors in the population are below 5 million, we consider the system accurate enough to pass the audit.
So tolerable error in this context is a financial ceiling.
Exactly. However, the framework dictates a completely different approach for compliance testing.
Let me read the text. In compliance tests, it is the maximum rate of deviation from a prescribed control procedure that the professionals are willing to accept.
Compliance testing is not concerned with monetary value. It's concerned with procedural integrity and security behavior.
Let's shift our scenario to an identity and access management system.
Good example. The established control procedure dictates that any time an administrator grants a user elevated privileges, say, giving a developer root access to a production server, a secondary manager must approve the request in the system.
You pull a sample of 500 elevated access grants from the system logs.
You aren't looking for missing dollars. You're looking for missing approvals. A missing approval is a deviation from the prescribed control.
In this scenario, tolerable error is expressed as a percentage, a deviation rate.
The audit team might conclude, we understand that human error occurs, and occasionally emergency access is granted outside standard workflows. We will establish a tolerable deviation rate of 2%.
So if your sample reveals that 3% of the access grants lack a secondary approval, the tolerable error threshold has been breached.
Even if no actual financial damage occurred from those unapproved access grants, the control itself has failed. The system is operating outside the acceptable parameters of digital trust.
That fundamental divide between materiality in substantive tests and deviation rates in compliance tests governs how every audit is structured.
Which leads us directly into grouping 3, the methodologies. We must understand the difference between attribute sampling and variable sampling.
These terms define the specific analytical lens we apply to our subset of data. Attribute sampling is defined by the framework as a method used to select a portion of a population based on the presence or absence of a certain characteristic.
Attribute sampling is inherently binary.
Like a light switch.
Yes, it is utilized almost exclusively during compliance testing. You're evaluating a specific attribute, and the result is a simple yes or no, true or false, pass or fail.
Let's look at firewall configurations. You sample 1,000 incoming IP packets that were flagged as suspicious. The attribute you're testing for is blocked by firewall.
You look at the first packet log. Was it blocked? Yes. Second packet, was it blocked? No.
There's no spectrum of blocked. It either happened or it didn't. You calculate the percentage of yes results and compare it against your tolerable deviation rate.
Contrast that binary approach with variable sampling. The text defines this incredibly specifically.
Hear it.
A sampling technique used to estimate the average or total value of a population based on a sample. It is a statistical model used to project a quantitative characteristic, such as a monetary amount.
Variable sampling is applied during substantive testing. You're no longer asking a yes or no question. You're asking how much or to what extent.
It's a spectrum. Let's say you're auditing a telecommunications company's billing system. You pull a sample of 1,000 customer invoices to verify that the automated late fee algorithm is calculating charges correctly.
You aren't just asking, was a late fee applied? You are calculating the exact monetary variable of the late fee against the customer's base charge.
You determine the average error amount per invoice in your sample, and then you use complex statistical models to project that variable across the entire population of 10 million invoices.
It requires a significantly more advanced mathematical approach than simple attribute sampling.
Which provides the perfect segue into grouping 4, the approaches. This grouping addresses the critical divide between human intuition and statistical rigor.
We'll start by examining non-statistical sampling.
The definition here requires careful reading. Method of selecting a portion of population based on professional judgment and experience for the purpose of quickly confirming a proposition.
In the field, we often call this judgmental sampling or heuristic sampling.
Right. It relies entirely on the accumulated experience of the practitioner.
If an auditor has spent a decade investigating Active Directory compromises, they develop an intuition for where threat actors hide.
They might bypass a random sample and directly query the logs of 3 specific service accounts because their gut tells them those accounts are highly vulnerable.
And that non-statistical approach is highly efficient for targeted discovery. If that auditor pulls those 3 logs and finds malicious lateral movement, they have successfully confirmed the proposition that a breach has occurred.
They found the needle because they knew exactly where to look in the haystack.
But, and this is a massive but, the framework attaches a non-negotiable caveat to this methodology. The text explicitly states, this method does not allow drawing mathematical conclusions regarding the entire population.
This is a foundational limitation that many junior practitioners fail to grasp. Because the sample was selected based on human bias and intuition, rather than probability theory, it is mathematically invalid for extrapolation.
If you use your gut to select 50 high-risk servers out of a cluster of 5,000, and you find that 10 of them are unpatched,
you cannot mathematically claim that 20% of the entire 5,000 server cluster is unpatched.
You only have anecdotal evidence about those specific 50 servers. If you attempt to present a mathematical conclusion about the entire population to a board of directors based on a non-statistical sample, you are in direct violation of the framework's evidence standards.
To make claims about the macro environment, you must utilize statistical methods.
And to utilize statistical methods efficiently on massive data sets, we must understand how to organize the data.
The framework defines 2 distinct approaches to this organization: sampling stratification and statistical stratification.
While they sound nearly identical, the operational difference is profound. Sampling stratification is defined as dividing a population into distinct subgroups or strata based on specific characteristics to ensure you get a representative sample.
Think of a global enterprise network containing 3 distinct types of endpoints: desktop workstations, mobile devices, and industrial IoT sensors on a manufacturing floor.
If you just pull a completely random blind sample of 1,000 endpoints, you might accidentally pull 900 workstations and miss the IoT sensors almost entirely.
Sampling stratification solves this by logically segmenting the population. You acknowledge the distinct subgroups.
You intentionally construct your query to pull a proportional sample from the workstation stratum, the mobile stratum, and the IoT stratum. It is a logical organization of data to ensure comprehensive coverage.
But statistical stratification elevates that logic into the realm of pure mathematics.
The text defines it as selecting a portion by means of mathematical calculations and probabilities for the purpose of making scientifically and mathematically sound inferences regarding the characteristics of the entire population.
You're no longer just logically dividing the groups, you're applying variance formulas to determine the optimal sample size for each specific stratum based on the homogeneity of the data within it.
If the workstation configurations are highly standardized, meaning low variance, the math dictates you need a smaller sample to achieve a 95% confidence level.
But if the IoT sensors are highly customized and volatile, high variance, the math demands a larger sample size for that specific subgroup.
You remove human logic from the sizing equation and replace it with probability algorithms.
And the utilization of probability algorithms transitions us to our final grouping, grouping 5, the math.
Here we go.
This is where we encounter the most technically specialized term in the entire framework, the Poisson distribution.
Yeah, when a practitioner first reviews Appendix C, encountering a complex statistical concept like the Poisson distribution nested within an IT audit framework can be jarring.
It feels like it belongs in an advanced physics textbook, not a compliance manual.
It is advanced statistics, but it is the indispensable mathematical engine for evaluating modern cybersecurity and network operations.
The text defines it precisely. A distribution of independent events, usually over a period of time or space, used to help predict the probability of an event. Like the binomial distribution, this is a discrete distribution.
Let's deeply unpack this. Why do we need a discrete probability distribution named after a 19th century French mathematician to evaluate a 21st century cloud architecture?
Because of the fundamental nature of how digital systems record reality. Let's contrast continuous data with discrete data.
Okay.
A normal distribution, the classic bell curve, is designed to measure continuous data, like human height or the exact temperature of a server room. These values exist on an infinite spectrum.
But IT system logs do not record continuous spectrums. They record discrete events.
Right. Think about an intrusion detection system, an IDS monitoring incoming network traffic. The IDS records a dropped packet.
That is an event. It either dropped the packet or it didn't. You cannot have 0.7 of a dropped packet. You have one dropped packet or you have two. The data is discrete.
Furthermore, these discrete events occur over a specific interval of time. Network traffic is measured in events per second or events per hour.
Finally, to utilize the Poisson distribution, we must assume these events are independent.
The fact that a packet was dropped at 10:01 a.m. does not mathematically influence whether a packet will be dropped at 10:02 a.m.
So we have discrete, independent events occurring over an interval of time. That is the exact mathematical environment the Poisson distribution was designed to model.
How does an auditor actually deploy this math in the field?
By calculating lambda.
Yes. Lambda represents the established historical average rate of an event occurring over our time interval.
Let's say we're auditing the authentication logs of an enterprise VPN. Through historical baseline data, we know the system experiences an average of 12 failed login attempts per hour due to normal human error.
Forgotten passwords, expired tokens, that sort of thing. So our lambda is 12.
Now, you are reviewing the logs for a specific 2-hour window on a Saturday night. You see a spike. You count 45 failed login attempts in a single hour.
A junior analyst might just look at that and say, well, 45 is higher than 12, so that's bad.
But professional skepticism requires empirical proof. Is 45 just a random statistical anomaly, a bad hour where everyone forgot their password, or is it a coordinated brute force attack?
This is where the Poisson formula is weaponized.
The auditor plugs the historical mean, lambda equals 12, and the observed event count, x equals 45, into the Poisson probability mass function.
The formula calculates the exact mathematical probability of observing exactly 45 failed logins in a single hour, assuming the normal historical rate holds true.
And the math returns a probability that is infinitesimally small. It might calculate that the chance of this occurring naturally is 0.000000001%.
Exactly. The mathematics strip away human bias, intuition, and guesswork. The Poisson distribution provides undeniable statistical proof that the baseline environment has fundamentally changed.
The events are no longer independent, or the underlying rate has been artificially amplified. The auditor has mathematically proven the existence of an anomaly,
justifying an immediate escalation of the audit into a full forensic incident response. Without understanding that specific discrete distribution, the auditor is just staring at a list of numbers on a signed dashboard, completely blind to the mathematical reality hidden within the logs.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a breath, pull back from the mathematics, and view the entire landscape we've just traversed.
We have decoded the DNA of digital trust.
We began in Appendix A, establishing the immutable laws. We learned that the complexity of modern architecture mandates collective team proficiency.
We explored the necessity of mapping risk across the specific technology, the audit process, and the broader enterprise exposure.
We examined the rigorous demands of preserving ephemeral evidence, the ethical requirement of declaring a scope limitation when visibility is lost, and the psychological armor of professional skepticism.
From those foundational laws, we navigated the operational matrix of Appendix B.
We analyzed how a single guideline, like performance and supervision, acts as a central hub, directly dictating whether a team exercises due professional care, gathers uncorrupted evidence, and delivers accurate reporting.
We saw that execution cannot be compartmentalized from ethics.
Finally, we mastered the vocabulary of truth, Appendix C. We defined the vast scope of the population and the mechanism of audit sampling.
We dissected the critical difference between substantive materiality thresholds and compliance deviation rates when defining tolerable error.
We differentiated the binary lens of attribute sampling from the financial projections of variable sampling.
We drew a hard line between the intuitive dangers of non-statistical sampling and the rigorous demands of statistical stratification,
culminating in the deployment of the Poisson distribution to mathematically prove anomalies in discrete system logs.
By internalizing Appendices A, B, and C, you're no longer just reviewing guidelines. You possess the precise blueprint for how top-tier experts impose order on digital chaos.
You understand that evaluating an enterprise environment is not an exercise in intuition. It requires structural rigor, unyielding skepticism, and advanced statistical mathematics.
As we conclude this masterclass, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought.
An avenue for your own exploration that builds upon the foundational concepts we've discussed today, specifically regarding the concept of tolerable error.
The framework explicitly states that tolerable error is fundamentally anchored in professional judgment.
It requires a human being to evaluate the business context and determine the threshold where an error becomes material or a deviation becomes unacceptable.
But consider the current trajectory of enterprise architecture. We are transitioning from petabytes to exabytes of data.
The sheer volume and velocity of information flow have vastly surpassed human cognitive capacity.
In response, enterprises are rapidly deploying artificial intelligence and automated machine learning algorithms to execute continuous real-time auditing and sampling of these massive populations.
Which forces a profound question. As we inevitably hand the execution of these statistical models over to automated systems, who actually defines materiality?
When AI algorithms govern the sampling of interconnected global financial markets, autonomous transportation networks, and automated healthcare delivery systems, where is the boundary between a mathematically tolerable error calculated by a black box neural network and an unacceptable human consequence?
If a healthcare AI determines that a 0.005% error rate in a continuous patient monitoring system is statistically immaterial based on historical baseline data, but that specific deviation rate results in a catastrophic failure of patient care,
The statistical math was flawless, but the judgment was fatal.
it challenges us to consider the future of professional skepticism. Does that deeply human, required mindset of doubt eventually become obsolete because we can no longer comprehend the scale of the data being evaluated by the machines?
Or, conversely, is the application of human professional skepticism, the ability to look at an algorithm's output and demand contextual proof, the absolute only safeguard we have left against blindly surrendering digital trust to an automated system.
It is a critical challenge, and navigating that intersection between statistical automation and human judgment will define the next decade of our profession. Thank you for attending today's deep dive into the ITAF framework.
We hope you leave this session with a significantly sharper lens through which to evaluate the data, the architecture, and the risks that surround you.
Keep questioning the evidence, keep verifying the outputs, and we will catch you next time.